Good morning. Welcome to AMCHAM's very first webinar of 2022, and especially with the missiles from North Korea and the upcoming presidential election. What a special webinar. Thank you very much for joining us this morning and obviously in the evening for this very special virtual event. We are so honored to have General Curtis Scaparrotti, the former commander of the UN Command, Combined Forces Command, and the United States Forces Korea. I've known General Scaparrotti now since he was in Korea, and he has always demonstrated outstanding leadership throughout his immense service in South Korea. I deeply appreciate him for taking the time out of his busy schedule to share his insights with us today. The U.S. Korea alliance is based on strong economic, political, and military ties. Some of the leadership from AMCHAM had the honor of visiting the DMZ and witnessed firsthand the joint operation between the UN Command, Combined Forces Command, and the United Forces Korea, and the Korean military force. What a remarkable military alliance that we have between US and Korea. We all came away with a deep, deep appreciation for our servicemen and women, including remarkable leaders such as General Scaparrotti for their important work in maintaining peace and security on the Korean Peninsula. In this context, I very much look forward to today's discussion. We're going to hear from General Scaparrotti on the evolving geopolitical dynamics in the region and the implications for the business community in Korea. With that, let me formally introduce General Scaparrotti, because I think that, a gentleman of his stature really deserves a thorough introduction. As I mentioned briefly, General Scaparrotti served as the commander of the United Nations Command, Combined Forces Command, and U.S. Forces Korea and South Korea from 2013 to 2016. He is also a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy. In 2019, General Scaparrotti completed a distinguished 41-year career in the U.S. Army as the commander, U.S. European Command, and Supreme Allied Commander, Europe of NATO. Okay. Part of that, he also served as a director of the Joint Staff, commander of the International Security Assistance Force, the deputy commander of U.S. Forces Afghanistan, and the commanding general of I Corps and Joint Base Lewis McChord, and the commanding general of the 82nd Airborne Division. General Scaparrotti is now a senior counselor at the Cohen Group in Washington, D.C., and serves on the boards of directors at both the Atlantic Council and the Korea Defense Veterans Association. Obviously, a lot of us, we owe a lot of gratitude for General Scaparrotti's personal sacrifice in protecting the men and women here in South Korea, and also serving the United States of America. So thank you so much for joining us, General Scaparrotti. I'd like to now begin the fireside chat.
Hey, James, thank you. And thanks so much for that very warm introduction. It's been, it was a privilege to serve for those 41 years, and particularly a great, great privilege to be the commander in Korea and work with the Korean forces and a part of the alliance. So thank you, and I appreciate you mentioning it. I would just add, if I could, as we get started, that I really appreciate being here a part of AMCHAM. When I was the commander, I came to AMCHAM events, was privileged to get to know your leaders and your members, and I think it is one of those strengths of the alliance, frankly. The innovation, the leadership that is a part of our businesses in both U.S. and Korea are clearly one of our strengths. And I did appreciate that association, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. So thanks.
Yes. In fact, I still remember, General, when the chairman at AMCHAM at that time was the guy who ran Boeing,
Right.
Pat Gaines. I know you're a classmate of his.
Yep.
And I can tell you that he has said nothing but the most powerful things about your leadership and all you've done. So what an honor it is for us to have you back.
Well, it's great to be back. Thank you very much, James.
Great. So why don't we, start with the first question, which is, we're already on year one of the Biden administration. So compared to the Trump administration, what do you think are the most notable similarities and differences in President Biden's foreign policy for Asia Pacific?
James, when I hear the question, the first thing that comes to mind is I'm actually a little surprised that there isn't greater differences in the policy. I expected that coming in, but frankly, I'll cover first where I think that they've remained. The two policies from Trump to Biden administration have a lot of things in common. First of all, Biden embraced the Indo-Pacific strategy and the Indo-Pacific as a priority immediately. That was developed under the Trump administration. It had somewhat come in from the Obama administration, the pivot as well. Biden remains pretty tough on China. He's been hesitant to negotiate a U.S.-China trade agreement. There hasn't been a lot of movement in that area either. He's maintained most of the Trump era sanctions, as well, against our competitors or adversaries, if you want to call them that. And then finally, President Biden doesn't call it America First. It's nothing like the America First in that sense, but where there is similarity, and that is that the Biden administration clearly has their domestic priorities, and those are first, and it's been a part, I think, of the administration as well. Now the differences, and they are notable, I would admit, but I think the bigger one is that Biden has significantly embraced a more multilateral approach to foreign policy. He has emphasized collaboration with our allies and our partners. And in fact, the Indo-Pacific was the first to benefit from that, as the first cabinet visits were in fact in Japan and Korea. The first 2+2s were out here out in the Indo-Pacific. The first presidents to come to Washington and meet, one was President Moon. So I think that is a definite difference. It's interesting because, if you looked at the military policy then under Trump, it actually had the same priority under Secretary Mattis. It was a matter of how you acted on it. And Biden clearly has a different tact here and a more aggressive one in terms of multilateral approach to foreign policy. The second one is that Biden has emphasized the hiring of career diplomats, more so than the Trump administration had, in my view. And that's specifically clear within the Indo-Pacific. In the NSC, across the board, within state and in Department of Defense, you have experienced diplomats, career service officers that have a lot of time and experience there. And many of them are ones that we knew in the Obama administration as well. So they've moved up. But they have good experience in it. You have Sung Kim, for instance, taking over the North Korea portfolio. And as you and I both know, we knew him well as the ambassador and great ambassador in the Republic of Korea. Nick Burns, one of our most talented diplomats and experienced ones, picked to be an ambassador to China now. So I think that's an indication and a clear change as well. With respect to China, as I said, Biden's been tough, but his difference has been he's had an emphasis on communication. Both he and the Secretary of State have said that we will collaborate and cooperate where we can, compete where we should, and there may be some contention where we must. But they've tried to lead with diplomacy, and that's been a clear signal as a part of their foreign policy as well. And I think a sharp contrast to the Trump's approach, particularly in his last year with respect to China and in the Indo-Pacific. And then one final one I would mention is that, it's clear the Biden administration has placed a priority on freedom, democracy, human rights, et cetera, as a portion of our foreign policy. So he's added what some may say is idealistic bent to it, but I think an important one too, and it colors everything that they do.
Well, General, thank you so much for such a comprehensive, summary of the differences and similarities. And very similar to you, General, AMCHAM is a non-political, nonpartisan organization, and we're here ready to serve any administration, whether it's President Trump or President Biden. So your explanation was very, very helpful. Now let's talk about China a little bit more. And I'd like to really hear about your opinion and your perspective, because as we both know, China continues to pose a lot of geopolitical tension and diplomatic challenges for the U.S. And I know that President Xi, since assuming power in 2012, he's been very explicit about transforming China into a great power by 2049 through his economic and military expansion. I'd like to hear about your perspective. How do you think that the U.S. government could and should manage this geopolitical challenge?
Yeah, well, thanks, James. You took the first thing I would say is he's been very clear. Xi has been very clear in his objectives. And I think more so in the last 6 or 8 months, because he's made some very bold statements. And within the last 2 weeks, he said that they will be the power, the global power within 20 years. That, China's rejuvenation is going to happen. Statements like that. So, I mean, it's clear where he intends to take the country, and that's a challenge for us, quite frankly. So having said that, and seen not only what they say, but their actions, their capabilities with particularly this, what is, I think, a very impressive development of their military capabilities. I think the first thing is we've got to be absolutely clear in what our vital interests are and what's acceptable and what's not with a country like China with its intent. And behind what we say has to be a very strong military. We have to have a military that is prepared, it's ready, and it's also designed both in capacity and capability to deal with China as it is today and as it will be in another 10 years because it's growing. That's true for our allies as well. Our allies have to have forces that are relevant to this threat, and we have to have a level of interoperability that allows us to be a real match for them, a real problem for China. And having said that, I said that first because I'm a military guy, but frankly, I said it that way because it's not that we ought to use the military first. I don't believe in that at all. But we are the muscle for diplomacy to be effective. China, and I think Russia as well, both respect strength. That's what they operate on. And so with a strong military, then we have the opportunity to do the following, and that is to use all of our powers, all of our national powers, diplomatic, economic, informational, as well as military, together with our allies to influence them. I think that's the way to success. That is also very difficult. It takes a lot of talent and experience to do that. But that is where we're at, I believe, today, geopolitically. And we can succeed if we work with our allies and we are able to integrate all of our powers together. We can match this with the friends that we have, not only in the Indo-Pacific, but in Europe as well.
General, you talked about strength through the military. One of my all-time favorite slogans, and I think it came from one of the ships in that's out there, is peace through strength. And I know it's a motto that a lot of us use, and it's also pretty similar in the business world as well. Peace through strength. And I love what you folks have done in the military. But from a security implication for the countries that are near China, I'm talking Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. What do you think are the security implications given China's stated mandate of being a powerhouse? Yeah.
Well, personally, I think it's in their vital interests to recognize the changes that China intends to make in Russia as well. To move from a rules-based international order that's based on democratic values, freedoms, individual freedom, and particularly, I think, the sovereignty of states' boundaries and the sovereignty of states' abilities to determine how they govern. And of course, a great democracy like Korea, the Republic of Korea, for instance, this is fundamental. So that's what's at stake. I think that's really what's at stake in the longer run. And so they have to be willing to take a stand. They have to be strong and prepare themselves for this kind of competition. They too, obviously, will seek to cooperate where they can. I mean, they can't ignore the fact that China's a powerhouse next door and that it's their largest trading partner. That's to be expected. But here again, that's where very experienced diplomatic approach, etc., is needed. But I think if we do this together, we can navigate those turbulent waters.
General, from our perspective, it seems like the Biden administration has been obviously heavily focused on deterring the Chinese influence in Asia Pacific, but we also kind of see it as if they're being really disengaged in dealing with North Korea. Do you see any foreign policy shift in President Biden's approach towards North Korea going forward?
Well, the Biden administration said it's going to be calculated and deliberate, I think are the words they use. And I know Sung Kim has been active. Regrettably, North Korea, as you know, hasn't responded. They've literally not accepted, an invitation without any preconditions to talk. That's disappointing. My worry at this point is that this approach, if it continues without response, literally begins to look like, to me, strategic patience of the Obama time period, and that really didn't work either. So I don't know whether there's a shift coming. I just believe there needs to be a shift. We need to begin to look for the way to bring them back to the table and begin negotiations. And that could be, forms of both diplomacy and strength. I think it's going to take a little bit of the stick as well as the carrot. We'll have to address what Kim Jong-un cares about, the security of the regime. He cares about maintaining the military and the information control that he has. Those things that are important to him. We'll have to give him some assurance that those things can be protected, and yet he can still come out in a better place if he works with us. So those are the things we have to try and find. I would tell you too that no matter which way we go, the alliance being aligned and one in the movement forward, and whatever movement this is imperative. Kim Jong-un would love to split us.
Of course.
And we can't allow that to happen.
So the recent launch of missile activity here from North Korea, is that something we should take a lot more seriously, just as citizens or residents of South Korea?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One thing about North Korea is that when I was the commander and we were watching them begin to develop their different missile systems, this was in 2013 to 2016. That's when they first fired or attempted to fire their submarine launched ballistic missile, et cetera. We looked at it then and we said, intelligence folks and everyone kind of said, this is hard to do. This is going to take them a long time. It didn't take them a long time. They don't have it refined yet in the SLBM. I don't think the hypersonics they've fired in the last two are necessarily where they need it. There's still debate about that, but they're clearly on the right path. And one of the things I learned is they don't test the way that we do in the West. And that's why they're moving a little faster, potentially. They'll take greater risk. So as they have in the past, they'll continue to get better. They'll solve their problems. And they'll have better missile systems. They'll have new means of delivery. They'll have more precise ones. And all the while, they're building more nuclear devices. It's just natural for a country that has this capability, and they have more, is to decide what more can I do with it. So I think we have every reason to be concerned about its impact on the security and stability of the Indo-Pacific, and particularly the Korean Peninsula. And I think the second thing is that, well, up until just recently, when he started shooting missiles again, Kim Jong-un, we've been in a relatively quiet period along the DMZ, comparatively speaking, to past years. We shouldn't believe that DMZ is any less dangerous than it was even 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. You know, it still has an incredibly large North Korean force on the north side and a large ROK force in the south. The Korean force with, you know, a large number of missiles and rockets and artillery, all within 35 miles of Seoul, the capital. And we've seen over the years that it can go from quiet to somewhat of a crisis in a couple of days. So we should always be ready, and we should never underestimate the real danger that's posed along the most heavily armed, you know, border on the globe.
Well, again, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives on this very, you know, sensitive topic. I know we could spend even more time talking about China and North Korea, but we have so many more, you know, topics that I want to discuss with you, including the upcoming 20th Korean presidential election. Obviously, it's less than 60 days away. The election campaign is in full swing. In fact, at AMCHAM, we're very fortunate to have had hosted both leading candidates via Fireside chat and also via a special meeting we had with both candidates. But despite the growing security concerns in the region, the election campaign really focused a lot on domestic issues. How do you think the Korean presidential election could impact Korea's foreign policy stance towards the U.S., China, and North Korea? And I'm sure you're pretty aware of the two leading candidates and some of their, you know, directives.
Yeah, well, first of all, James, I'll take the tack that you noted when you introduced me and AMCHAM and said that, you know, we don't really take sides. So I'm going to not take sides because I'm in the military. I haven't done that in the past. I'll try not to do that. I'll take kind of a center road, which might be disappointing, but to those on the screen. But I would say that you, and particularly if you're in Korea, you've heard more than I've heard. You're probably more of an expert than I am. I get feed from my buddies, and I'm trying to read as much as I can to stay close to it. But I think you're more informed. Here's what I would say. I think that while they've not discussed foreign policy as much, it's clearly one of the most important aspects of the presidency. And I think it's important they do discuss it. I would give this caution, and I think this is the thing that is good about how it's not, you know, how it's come out so far, and that is that I don't think they should discuss specific decisions that they're going to make, primarily because neither one is fully prepared to really make that kind of a decision until they have the responsibility of being the president, and they have the advantage of having a full picture from intelligence, from experienced persons of the past, and be able to make some of those decisions based on a really comprehensive review of the situation. It's just too important to do it otherwise.
Yeah.
And you can do it much more comprehensively, particularly when you understand the real responsibility that lies in the decisions you have to make as a president. So I would hope that those decisions are made there and not on a debate stage, frankly. I think that, you know, as you look at the different administrations that have come and gone here in recent years in Korea, it strikes me how much they do move toward the middle in terms of, there's a difference in the way they approach the military conflict there or the responsibilities for security, but they do tend to move toward the middle more. I mean, even the Moon administration, probably not as as hard as the conservative administration had been prior to that, in terms of what it had to say about security, but look at what it's done in terms of continuing modernization. The percent spent on defense has gone up each year, et cetera. I tend to think that that's good, and I hope that whichever party wins, that will still be the case here in the future, that they'll understand the importance of that modernization and the budget that they have to put into defense to be ready to defend their country and to be a reliable part of the alliance. And the next thing is I hope they do understand, and I think each of the presidents has understood the importance of the alliance. I strongly believe that the alliance is actually the best defense for both of our countries in our own vital interests. There's no better way of doing this and addressing the problem of North Korea or addressing the problem of a great power like China. So I would hope that both presidents have a good view of that as they approach the presidency. Now, having said all of that, I think from what I can gather, there's a difference in how they'll approach that. And there's concerns about the perspectives on security, et cetera. That's a part of being in a democracy. And it's one of the beauties of living in a democracy is we get to make a vote. And I hope that the Korean people will actually go vote and understand the responsibility and the importance of what they're doing. I have confidence that we'll stay close allies on the other side of the March election.
I think what he just shared with us is quite reassuring because, obviously at AMCHAM, we had a chance to visit with both candidates. And when you read the headlines from the media, from some of these meetings, the two candidates does seem to have pretty strong differences, whether it's China, whether it's North Korea, whether how they handle the alliance with Japan and the United States. That was another one that came out interestingly. So we hope, very similar to you, General, that it's more of a middle of the road that allows all of us to work, in a very strategic manner with the new incoming administration in May.
One of the challenges for a leader, and I think it's true for a military one, is to be able to clearly understand the environment so they understand it as it is, not as they want it to be. And, a great book by Barbara Tuchman, March of Folly, pointed that out. It's so often when we fail in terms of security over the years, different nations, it's a matter of, the environment they want and acting on those terms as opposed to what they really have. So,
and I think one of the most important things that I just heard you say, General, was that, before coming out with a specific policy decision, both candidates should know a lot more about the facts before putting them into action. And I think that was a very, very wise, comment by you, General. Thank you so much. Now let's move on to, COVID-19. I know that different countries have handled COVID differently, but I think one thing that the Korean government has done is, I think they've done a very good job. They obviously earned a global reputation for its robust pandemic response. And I'm also seeing Korea's economic and soft power growing as well. Whether it's K-pop, whether it's K-drama, right? Whether it's K-movies, K-sports, and even K-food. I think the Korean branding has become pretty significant.
It's international.
So as you see Korea's increased economic and soft power, do you see that translating into Korea taking a more of an active role in the military in a wider region?
Yeah, I think, but I think in the military, but James, I would say I think it's a broader role because of that influence that they can have. I mean, they do have, as I just said, I think it's an international influence now, in terms of the culture. You see it I've seen it in Europe when I lived there. I've seen it here in the States. It is international and it is influence. And then you couple that cultural influence with diplomatic, economic capabilities and a military one. And yes, you have the ability for good outside of Korea or the immediate theater of the peninsula. And I think the Republic of Korea does. You know, I sense when I was there, James, and I visited here in October, more so than I've ever sensed it in the past, and I talked to both, you know, diplomats and military and friends, that there is this sense in Korea now among the public that, as one term to me, they're a middleweight power now. They understand that they are the 10th economy in the world. They do have about the 6th best military in the world. They do have a culture that is globally recognized, and they do have an influence and can have an influence for good in the region, if not globally. And I think that's good. I think that's healthy. And I just share with you, I sensed that while I was there, and it's really the first time I've recognized, you know, Korean friends talking about it that way. Now, we also saw that as a part of the summit between the presidents. It is, so you ask militarily, it is, I think, the appropriate forward path for the alliance to become more global, because not only in a military fashion, but because of our other national powers and what they can bring to bear as well.
So General, let's talk about, you know, Korea as a potential military powerhouse. Obviously, as a Korean American, I would really hope that there is a continued strengthening of the alliance between U.S. and Korea military. But now we have this discussion on the transfer of the wartime operational control from the United States to Korea. What are the opportunities and challenges as we even discuss this topic on here? I know that sometimes we're talking about accelerating it. Sometimes we're saying we're not ready. So where are we with this?
So, okay, well, you're going directly to OPCON. Let me address that, and then I'm going to take your question a little broader. With respect to the operational control of the OPCON transition, the answer to that is that we're working through the alliance processes and procedures to reach the goals that have been established as a part of that. There's a structure to this that is agreed upon by both sides. It's visited at every one of the MCMs and at the annual MCM, SCM. It was just visited again here. You know, when the U.S. Secretary met with the Minister of Defense from Korea, it was part of their report out. What you got is kind of the in-state report, but I'm sure, having been in these meetings, that between the two meetings was gone through in detail. There's specific tasks associated with it, and they report out, both U.S. and ROC, on where each one of the members is on the tasks that they have as a part of OPCON transition. We've made progress since the time I was commander. I think the progress is clear as well. There's essentially 3 steps to this. The first one's been done of 3. The fully operational capability, they've said they will do in 22, which is the second test, and the third will be a fully mission capable test that will be determined at the right time after that, to ensure that we meet the conditions. It's a conditions-based transition. And so that's the process. That's where we're at. I can't put a timeline on for you. I don't want to put a timeline on it. It was during my tenure that I believe strongly, and we agreed upon that it should become a conditions-based process, not a timeline, because it's far too important to both of our countries, and particularly for the security of the Republic of Korea, that we make this transition when the conditions are set, when it's right.
But you know, as I look at the different government officials from Korea, whether it's trade or foreign affairs and the defense ministries, they have actually reaffirmed that Korea is committed to strengthening their relationship with both the U.S. and China. So is this balancing act sustainable, given that the U.S. clearly has you know, some tension with China?
Yeah, I think it is. Now, I'd put some caveats on that. I think it's understandable that Korea would have a policy that tries to work with the country that has such an economic and trade relationship with it, as well as the country that is responsible, that works with them on their security. That's the dilemma. But I think they can work this middle ground. Now, the caveat I would make is this, James, and that is that they also have to make a stand on some issues regarding security. I honestly believe that we're in a time period where we're going to have to confront what kind of world we want to live in. Do we want one that supports a democratic country in the way we want to live, or will it once again be one of great power competition, or one of great power, might makes right, and one where these powers have spheres of influence? That's what brought us to the world wars we had. And I would hope that that we don't go that way again. But if we don't, it's going to take democratic countries like the Republic of Korea, the U.S. and others, Japan, on issues of security, on issues of sovereignty, on issues of the right international norms, being willing to take that stand. So you can't do it down the middle and get a free ride both ways.
What about Korea joining the Quad? Obviously, India, Japan, and Australia have committed to America via the Quad. Do you have any insights on Korea joining the Quad?
I wouldn't call it insights, because I haven't really talked to any of the leadership about it. But I think just talking to those that I know that have been in leadership and friends of mine, I don't think it's an immediate thing, but I'm encouraged from what I have heard. Again, Korea recognizes that it can be and has responsibility for good within the region as well. That's one of the responsibilities that comes with the power that you have. And I think there's a positive outlook toward perhaps working with the Quad. The Quad's not a military organization, for instance. It's not a formal organization per se. And so it gives some room there for a country like Korea to choose to take part of that at some point in the future. And I think it's something that should be considered. And I've heard other Koreans tell me that they think it's reasonable.
Now, let's just talk about U.S. Korea Japan relations, because it's a lot of people's opinion here that the relationship between Korea and Japan is probably at its lowest point, through memory. How do you see the direction of Korea-Japan relations in 2022, and is the trilateral security cooperation even possible or sustainable?
Yeah. So first of all, is it possible or sustainable? I think it's imperative. And I think if all three of our nations look at both our vital interests and the optimum conditions to get there, they would recognize the importance of us being able to work together. The importance of this trilateral relationship. So I think it is imperative. I think it can be done. I'm basically an optimist. I think it will move in the right direction. And for 22, I think that you have, from everything that I've heard, the Prime Minister in Japan is open to improving these relations. And you have here an election and a new president, a new president coming in with an opportunity then to begin to right these relations as well. It won't be easy, but I think it can be done. Secondly, I would tell you that I'm optimistic because I know that there are people-to-people relations, and I know that there are mill-to-mill relations that are understood. And those are factors that are real too and that influence this. In fact, they've been factors that probably have kept it at least as good as it is and been able to repair it and kickstart better relations as a result. So I think it can get there. And I think the conditions in the security environment are gonna make that obvious.
Now let's talk about the ambassadorial position in South Korea. Obviously, you know, the U.S. ambassador to South Korea is our honorary chairman at AMCHAM. We've always had a very close relationship with every single U.S. ambassador here. And you should know that our charge, Chris Corso, he's doing a phenomenal job as a charge. He's very active with our board meetings. He's very active with our meetings, and we're very proud to have him on board. That said, we get asked that question all the time. Why hasn't President Biden announced an ambassador to Korea when they have done so in Japan and in China? And some even speculate that the U.S. government is waiting for the new president of South Korea to be elected. Any thoughts on this topic, sir?
Well, you know, first of all, I've actually asked some in our government this question. You know, some would say, well, it's not important. Well, that's not true. I mean, the importance of the Republic of Korea is recognized, and you can see that in all the other things that we've done. But I am also very disappointed we haven't announced one yet. I think it's a significant position and important for our alliance and for all the reasons that we've talked about here this evening. I wish I could tell you that they told me that it's going to be announced soon. That's not the case. I mean, I wasn't told it wouldn't happen soon. I was just not told they knew when we would have one announced. And frankly, I haven't heard any recent rumors either. So, but I would encourage and hope that the Biden administration would do so very soon, because it just makes a difference to have the ambassador confirmed and present.
Of course. But, you know, whenever people ask me the question of, hey, why is it taking so long? I always reference, you know, Mark Knapper, who is now the official U.S. ambassador to Vietnam. My recollection is that he spent 18 months as the acting U.S. ambassador. And he did such a phenomenal job during those transformative periods. And even if you don't have a U.S. ambassador, we're so lucky and fortunate to have Chris Corso as our acting ambassador. But that said, you know, I think everyone is waiting for an announcement, and maybe it would take a little longer than we anticipated.
Yeah, no, I agree with you fully. I mean, I met with him while I was there. You know, the embassy's in very, very experienced hands. There's no doubt about that. And the other thing I would say is, you know, I think it's taken 7 or 8 months routinely, even in the best cases, to usually get all the ambassadors, begin to get them announced and into place. And that's been true for Korea several times in the past as well. So it isn't as if this is uncommon. And then finally, you know, that there's been political blocks to confirmations for quite some time now, and that does disrupt both who you're getting in to be confirmed and when you do your announcements. So that's been a difficult problem for the Biden administration, I'm sure, too. Hey, James, could I go back one on the trilateral real quick? One thing it just struck me over the years, not necessarily while I was there, but particularly working in Europe, some of the best diplomacy, in my experience, is done privately. Today, we seem to think that everything that's done has got to be in the press. And as you know, when it comes to, you know, ROC, Japan, U.S. relations, it's difficult. And if everything about it's in the press, it's going to be even more difficult. And I bring, my thought is that, you know, some of the best diplomacy and the most crucial diplomacy is not done in the public, and it's not presented in the press. And I think that might be part of the, you know, part of the solution here too.
Well, you know, we are really hopeful that you continue to, you know, engage with both governments and to offer your diplomacy and your insights, which is a win-win for both countries. I know we have a few questions from the audience.
Please.
And one is from someone who I think knows you well. His question is, members of the ROK National Assembly have advocated for the return of tactical nuclear weapons to the Korean Peninsula to obviously deter North Korea's threat. Given your experience in Europe and NATO's tactical nuclear weapons, what are your thoughts on the deployment of nuclear weapons in South Korea?
Well, I think the first thing is that, I'll give you my perspective without the ability to sit in the seat, have all the intelligence, et cetera, to make a decision. But generally, and I believe, and this I would say was my thinking in Europe as well, because we had this very same question with the deployment of the intermediate missiles that Russia put in place here in the last few years. I don't believe in Korea's position that necessarily the return of non-strategic missiles or nuclear devices to the peninsula is necessarily helpful. We have capability to provide extended deterrence by several means and flexible and mobile means that can be effective. And also, when you introduce those, then you've got a lot of other responsibilities that accrue. And sometimes those costs don't necessarily outweigh the benefits of placing them there. So I think, it comes down to a matter of deterrence, where that fits in your deterrence strategy, and if the benefits then outweigh the costs. So as I said up front, I can't really answer that unless I can see the entire, lay down. But generally, I would not personally think that that's probably an advantage in this point. And in Europe, I wasn't at that point, at least when I was in command, in favor of returning missiles, for instance, to the continent.
Another question which could be a little sensitive, and I'm not going to mention the company's name. It has to do with the F-35s. I guess there was some accident that took place. And the real question is, given the strong U.S.-ROK alliance, would there ever be an opportunity for Korea to actually make the F-35s?
Well, I can't really answer that one.
That's my thought.
Position. I would just tell you that, there are nations that have accepted the F-35 that have make some components, et cetera, and have some part in the development or the repair, for instance, of F-35s, et cetera. That's fairly limited, and it's a process our government goes through, frankly, because it is one of the most advanced systems that we have, and a phenomenal system. So I think that's a matter of really government to government discussions as to whether that could be. I think there's a possibility, but it certainly is not frequent, and it would be a great deal of conversation that'd have to go on.
And now the next question is, and I want to reference this person as well. This is Min Sung from IBM Korea. I can clearly see that he's a big fan of the U.S. military. He talked about how he served in the Navy. He was an aide to Admiral Yoon Hee Choi, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he also has experience the aircraft USS Kitty Hawk. I think what he would like to hear from you again is clearly the Korea-U.S. alliance is so important. And I think that he would like to hear from me again one more time on the historical meaning between South Korea and the U.S. alliance. Why so special? Why so important? And I think it's a great way to kind of sum up our discussion today, sir.
Well, anytime you talk about the alliance, you got to start with how it was born, and it was born in the Korean War, and it literally manifested itself as conflict does in U.S. and ROK service members and soldiers fighting side by side, bleeding and dying together, to protect the Republic of Korea and reestablish its security. And From that time on, of course, the United States stayed, and we became an alliance. We became partners. And we are, in fact, soldiers together. We're warriors. We're brothers in that regard. And as the Admiral knows, whether it's a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, when we work together under a real threat to defend each other's country's interest in our people, there's a bond that's formed that's unlike any other. And as I said before, Korea is a dangerous place. We all know that. And that is a dynamic, James, that perhaps you have to be one to fully appreciate, but I don't think so. I think our diplomats understand it as well. I think the Korean public can understand it, and we work like in KDVA to make sure that the American public understands the dynamic and the importance of the alliance. But that bond of trust is unlike any other. And it is the basis of the trust we have today, that if there's a crisis on the peninsula, we will be there together, and we will be strong, and we will be dominant.
You know, General, in the interest of time, I have one final question before, you know, you and I both close the session. Every general who I had a chance to visit with, and every general who I had a chance to hear them speak, usually ends a lot of the meetings with, let's go together, 같이 갑시다.
같이 갑시다.
Yep. Who started this slogan anyway?
You know,
how long did that take place?
That actually started, as I understand it, it was as the CFC was formed. So, you know, in the late 70s. And I was once told who did, and I'm sorry, I don't know. I wish I did, I should know. But it was one that started there and has picked up, and it's a tremendous motto. You know, speaking of this, the military, all units have mottos. My regiment's let's go. You know, First Corps is courage. We all have something. And this one is one of those that, you know, you have hundreds of them, but there are a few that stand out. This is one of them. 같이 갑시다. There's few like it. We go together.
Yeah, and I know that even our former U.S. Ambassador Harry Harris always talks about that, and we're also very proud that as a military leader, he served as our U.S. Ambassador, and we hope to visit with him again.
Yeah.
Before I close the meeting today, do you have any final comments for the audience? I know that the audience is really appreciative of your insights on many topics that I know are pretty sensitive, and we appreciate you doing this very much.
Oh, I enjoyed doing it. I thank you for the opportunity. You know, the one thing I would say is that I've mentioned it several times, the integrity of our alliance, okay, the alignment of this alliance is paramount. As I've now led in 2 different alliances, having done NATO, and it can't be taken for granted. It must be nurtured in order to survive. And it is the most important thing that we do, because our adversaries want to split it. And if we aren't careful, we as nations get so focused on some of the small things, but not the vital things, that it'll begin to eat away at the strength of our alliance. We can't allow that to happen. We've got to keep our eyes on what's really important, on the long range and vital objectives. And if we do that, we'll stand strong together, and we won't allow anyone to chip away at the strength of the alliance. And everyone, to include everybody on this webinar tonight, has a responsibility, I think, that one, to support that, but 2, to educate others about the importance of the alliance.
And that's why I think, just in closing, I want to obviously, really from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for sacrificing your time this evening. But beyond that, sacrificing, your energy and your safety to really help all of us, both in Korea and South and the United States. And I also want to say that, I talked about your titles, Commander of the United Nations Command. Combined Forces Command and the United States Forces Korea. These are three huge jobs that you've had, and we're so honored that you have helped all of us.
Thanks, James.
For the audience, this program will be available via YouTube again. We'll send it out, and you can call AMCHAM, a permanent friend and a supporter of yours, General. Please come back and see us, and
come see you.
Yep, pound us for any time. Okay.
All right. If I can be helpful here to anybody in AMCHAM, just give me a call. You know how to get a hold of me.
And as we all know, General Scaparrotti is now an advisor at the Cohen Group. If there's anything that General can do for you, please contact him directly. Okay. Thank you so much, General. Stay healthy.
Have a good morning. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.